tell us a little bit about, your early experiences around type 1 diabetes, some of the advice that you got, early in your life about what to eat and how to kind of manage your life with type 1 diabetes. And then maybe that will lead into how you got to where you are today.
Okay, so I was diagnosed 44 years ago. I was born and raised in the Middle East. Um, I was diagnosed all those years ago. I don't remember much of life before I was diagnosed, but I do remember the day I was diagnosed, and I remember being at the hospital and not understanding anything. I think I spent the night there. And I remember my tantrums when it came to the daily injections, which grandma and mom would literally force onto me. They would physically restrain me so I would take my daily injection because I would die without it. They didn't know any other way. It wasn't that they were being cruel. They just didn't know how to handle it. I remember crying, kicking my legs. I remember all the tantrums. I was very young. Um, I remember grandma telling me, you're waking up all the neighbors. I didn't care. I think I rebelled and resisted for as long as I could until I couldn't do it anymore. It was tiring. I had to accept being diabetic and having to inject myself every single day. Now, I don't remember a sort of restriction because I don't remember what I used to eat before. I don't remember the daily portions of cake and then suddenly I was told you couldn't eat cakes. I just don't remember that transition. But it's interesting. I need to mention this. In those days, I know we're talking the 70s and maybe even pretty much all of the 80s. The dietary advice, well, at least in the Middle East, but I also found out recently that it was the same in Australia and probably the US as well. The advice for diabetics was to limit carbohydrates, not necessarily not to eat, but just not to eat sugar and limit carbohydrates and focus more on complex carbs. So I remember the meals mom would make for me, for example, and she would put only 1 tablespoon of rice and a lot more lentils, for example, if that was what we were eating. So she'd give me more chickpeas and less of the cracked wheat or bread. I remember that. And that's how I was grown up, basically eating clean food, homemade foods. There wasn't processed foods back then. We're certainly not when I was growing up, and it wasn't something we ate at home. So it was mainly lower carbohydrate sort of diet, home cooked, clean as could be. Until I came to the UK as a young adult to study. So I came to the UK, and one of the first things I did as a responsible type 1 diabetic was, of course, I had to register at the local diabetes clinic, which was based at the hospital in Cambridge at the time. And that's when, during my first visit, I actually found out that there is such a thing as there is such a thing as diabetics don't need to worry about eating differently. We have insulin, we have good insulin, and that's what insulin is there for. Just eat whatever you want and match it with insulin, cover it with insulin.
Oh
That
no.
was totally new to me. And of course, I fully welcomed it. I remember calling my mom and saying, the doctors in the Middle East, they knew nothing. They know nothing. Don't ever tell me not to have a Coke, because if I wanted a Coke, not that I ever liked Coke that much, but I literally told my mom, all those years you've kind of not giving me enough bread. Now I'm going to make up for it because I know I can cover it all with insulin. That's what they're telling me at the center. So I thought that I was raised in somehow in the wrong way, that I was deprived somehow. But that only came to me when I moved to the UK. And that's how I lived for over 20 years in the UK. Eat what you want. And in fact, that it was good and important to eat carbohydrates. And that all I had to do was cover it with insulin. But of course, we know, and Dr. Betty, you will know, it's impossible. It's virtually impossible to manually take the right dose of insulin to match and regulate your blood sugar rise and drop. You just cannot replicate a working pancreas, the way they think we can. It's just impossible. It's virtually impossible. Um, so
I
I've been
just
unhealthier and unhealthier, of course, over 20, 25 years until I found low carbohydrate sort of diet.